This week on the Q Division podcast,
we open the case of 1963's From Russia with Love.
This time, is it a shoe knife or a boot dagger?
Does Red Grant want to kiss or kill Bond?
And how much does a chess set truly cost?
All that and more on the Q Division.
Hello, agents. Welcome to another episode of the Q Division. I'm Gavin, and I've seen all the James Bond movies.
And I'm Chels, and I've seen 2 films and a TV special. Alleged TV special. Nothing special about it.
Oh, did you? Did you ever? But don't worry, we are not alone this week. We've activated a special secret agent guest. Joining us for this episode on From Russia with Love is my good friend, Chels' new good friend, filmmaker, co-creator of the film stage, and he doesn't want me to list all of his credits, but truly look him up, Dan Mecca.
What an honor to be here. Happy to be activated. Love an activation. I don't know how special my agency is. I think I have a couple little special skills, but certainly not as much as 007. But an honor to be talking about this film and with you guys.
The Q Division's top secret mission is to take a deeper look at the history and impact of the James Bond films and other media through a queer lens. Speaking of, the Q Division is a proud member of the Glitterjaw Queer Podcast Collective. You can find out more about Glitterjaw and their roster of shows that run the gamut of queer media at glitterjaw.com.
Oh, that mouthful. Oh, thank you for reading that for a second week in a row.
Absolutely crushed that.
Unfortunately, Dan Mecca, you are straight. We won't hold it against you.
I am. It's true. The rumors are true.
We know if you could be any other way, you would.
I would.
You watch women's sports, so that counts.
Yeah,
that's true. I do watch women's WNBA specifically, but yes, I love it all. Yes, I'm a big fan. Go Fever, for those who know.
I will say you are a bit of a good luck charm for me because you were the first ever guest on this podcast, sister podcast, The Mixed Reviews.
Oh, that's right.
And now you're our very first guest on the Q Division. And I'm very excited to have you because I do know that you are a James Bond fan. And I know that you were outpacing me in terms of research at one point. So I was like, no, the guest can't be more knowledgeable than me.
No, well, we text, Gavin and we were just talking before we hit record about other projects we were working on. And I tend to go down the rabbit hole when there's a task at hand, whether it's interviewing somebody or being a guest on a podcast. Or me and Connor O'Donnell, who's a mutual friend, we run the B-Side podcast for the film stage. So it's all of a piece of just how it is. You read a thing, you watch a thing, and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize, this led to that, or, we can get into it. The From Russia with Love. I had only read Casino Royale.
Oh, interesting.
Before this, and I used obviously this episode as an excuse to read From Russia with Love, and I learned a lot. It was really, and obviously rewatched the movie, but Ian Fleming, man, we'll get into it. Funny guy, guy.
I was going to say, Chels has also been learning a lot about Ian Fleming. I don't know how pretty of a picture it paints of this sort of solitary, grumpy man, but yeah, we will definitely get into it. Before we do, Chels, just what is the overall vibe going on for you because this is your first time seeing this movie?
It was my first time. It's okay. You missed the long, giant sigh where I was like, oh boy, because truly, let's see how many films James Bond doesn't slap a woman. He loves slapping a woman. But also, I did get some hot girls in this movie. My returning hot girl, a new bad bitch who's not a hot girl, but I was rooting for her. I mean, the Miss Universe pipeline to James Bond is so strong.
It's very real.
In the same year, too, for a couple of these actresses.
Yeah.
But yeah. But also, does he fuck in a boat at the end of every movie? I have to ask.
Not at the end of every movie, but there is a lot of boat fucking.
Right, because that's how Dr. No ends, too.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I just rewatched Dr. No, and it's funny. I always think, and Gavin, maybe you can kind of, because I feel like you're way more of an expert than I am with Bond. I always think of From Russia with Love as the one, and I think people say this about From Russia with Love, like this was the first Bond movie where all the Bond tropes are in the movie, right?
Yeah.
Like, and yet, there's a lot in Doctor No rewatching it that I forgot. Like, if you look at like Austin Powers, right, is like, oh, what are the things the culture knows? There's a few things in Doctor No that they're making fun of, right? I always think of it as like, oh, it started with From Russia with Love, but really that's actually not true. You know what I mean? There's a bit in Doctor No. I guess From Russia with Love, you have just like so many staples that then just don't ever get. I mean, one of them being really a more like Q branch becomes a bigger part of it, and then will only get bigger.
There's also a sense of continuity that From Russia with Love that, I mean, I think throughout all of the Connery films, but that sort of goes away as time goes on, just because when you're changing actors, you can't really do it. And there's like a loose continuity that they kind of bring in every now and then, but for the most part, like, this is the first one that, I mean, well, it literally is the first sequel, but it's the first one that like feels like a direct thing. And it's not just like the Sylvia Trench of it all and whatnot. Like, there's literal references to like, oh, he took out Dr. No. I believe, I was texting you about like how this is the first one that really feels like Bond, and all that separates it from Dr. No is literally $1 million.
Right. They doubled the budget. Yeah.
Yeah. A scrappy independent film.
They had real paint. It wasn't just cardboard.
I will say though, it is a crazy jump though.
Yes.
Like Dr. No really does feel like the Mighty Quinn with Denzel Washington. It's literally, it's just like guy down on Jamaica. Like, they don't go anywhere, right? He goes to Jamaica. That's where they are, right? And it's just like, he's kind of just a detective, right? It's not really like, and it's a fine story, and the Dr. No character's interesting enough, I suppose. And, Honey Rider and Ursula Andress, like there's stuff there. But From Russia with Love really, it's sprawling, it traverses the globe, it has a very provocative opening, right? I think you're just getting stuff that just feels big, right? Like myth making, right? Which doesn't really happen in the first one.
It also does a really good job of creating a plot that's incredibly simple, especially even by comparison to Dr. No, and yet is very complicated, has a lot of different arms, and there's things like, I mean, you're going to get this more and more. There's things you could easily take out of From Russia with Love, even though I love it and wouldn't want it to lose those things. But
the whole gypsy sequence.
Yeah, you could take it out and it wouldn't change the film in any way, shape, or form.
10 minutes. I mean, I just rewatching it, I was like, that's right. The whole Karen Bay, like, oh yeah, these two girls, they're fighting over a guy. They're going to fight. Let's watch them fight. Yeah, you want to watch them fight? You're like, I guess so. We just
sure.
Are you team red or team green?
I guess I'm team, what am I? Team red, I feel, right?
Well, you could be James Bond and be team both.
Yeah. What does that say about? What is it? Or what are you, Chels? What are you?
Team red, because that actress later appeared on Days of Our Lives. And that's like,
I love
very
that.
short stint in the 80s, but
I love all these soap opera connections. I love it. I live for it. All right. Well, why don't we get into the production of the movie? Because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to dig into just going into the history. From Russia with Love, with Love, was written in 1956. It's Fleming's fifth Bond novel, and if his plans went through, it was going to be his last novel. We mentioned in the last episode, he's kind of getting bored of writing James Bond, and he doesn't really like coming up with these stories. And I think what's interesting, I know you reread the book this time, Dan. Bond, still an asshole, but more human than he's been in more of the other books. He's suddenly kind of afraid of flying, and he like brings up how he would never kill a person in cold blood, which I think is really hilarious that Connery does immediately in Dr. No.
I know.
But I found that kind of interesting that he's like, okay, I'm writing him off. I'm gonna send him off. I'm gonna make him less superhuman than he's been in the other books. And spoiler alert for the end of the novel, he like succumbs to poison. And the book literally ends with him, for all intents and purposes, if there was no follow-up, dying.
Yeah, Mathis is like, hey, man. So you're dying.
So-
And he's like, yeah. It's basically, right, it's more or less the Rosa, or is it Rosa, right? Rosa
Yep,
Klebb
Rosa
scene
Klebb.
at the end of the movie, but she gets him with the
Foot
little
dagger.
shoe knife. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, good for her.
Foot dagger. I love it. That foot dagger sounds so much better than
Then
shoe knife.
Well, here at the Q Division, we support women's wrongs. So,
Yes.
not just women's rights.
There is so much Rosa Klebb in the book.
Yes. And so much more.
Oh, Grants. Oh my God.
But I was gonna say, especially when it comes to Rosa Klebb, like they like he's like obsessed with how old and ugly she is. Like she's basically like a crone in the book, and
Well,
and then
yeah.
she shows up in like nighties and stuff, and he's like, oh, she's so hideous, isn't she?
But it's a weird, like, he has a respect for her legend, because the whole
Yes.
thing is she's like it's like actually it's really a fascinating, it's almost, because if you read Casino Royale, and honestly what put me off the books, if I'm being honest, right,
is how racist they are.
well, but Bond is so unlikable in Casino Royale, right, that I kind of was like, you know what, this I read one, you know, Ian can keep the rest, right? But you're not wrong. From Russia with Love, I enjoyed quite a bit more, and part of it is that Bond, you know, he got dumped by Tiffany Case, because Diamonds Are Forever is the novel that comes before From Russia with Love, so he's like sad about that, which is weird, right? Just for Bonds, you know.
Once again, a more human Bond.
And then like the stuff with Red Grant and Rosa Klebb are these like very long expositional descriptions of like their psychopathy, like
Yeah.
they're and they're like two sides of the same coin, and it's just, there's so much about the villains in the book, and then even in the movie, and we obviously will get into it. Like, it's probably my favorite opening of any Bond movie.
Yeah, it's great. And it
Yeah.
kind of comes by accident, but we'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah.
I do want to say, too, especially in talking about the psychopathy of Klebb and Grant, and once again, these are terms, we're going to come back to this later when we talk about them at the end of the episode. He refers to them both as asexual, and I think that's such an interesting thing, because the implication is just that Bond is like, because he's a good guy, he's allowed to be sexual, and because they are bad, they are not. And obviously, this is asexual taken in terms of 1956, not in the way that we assume or talk about, you know, queer identifying asexual people nowadays. But it's a really fascinating idea that, like, Ian Fleming's like, no, they are bad, and therefore they don't get to have this thing. And I mean, because he basically almost makes them sound like neuters, except for then he also is like, also Klebb's a lesbian.
I mean, she is evil, so of course.
I mean, wow. It's funny what I love about, because Shells, you were mentioning before, like the Connery Bonds, you know, he's raping women, slapping women, assaulting women, making fun of women, treating women like idiots. That like does not, I think it peaks, no spoilers, but I think and Gavin, you can correct me, I think it peaks at You Only Live Twice.
Yeah.
Like the shit that happens in that movie, you're like, maybe they should stop making Bond movies when you rewatch that movie. But it does subside, obviously, with the time, to the point where, like, when Brosnan makes them, he like refuses it, right? Which I'm sure
Roger Moore as well, famously,
right.
and Chels and I will get to that when we get to the Roger Moore episodes. But there comes a moment.
Yeah, but all of this to say, what is even more fascinating is, like, it's worse from Fleming, right? So it's this weird, you know, movies. I think I like to say is like, movies are time machines, whether or not they're period pieces, right? Whenever they were made, whether they were set in the time they were made or not, they represent the time in which they were made in one way or another. So, like, one of the most fascinating things about Bond is just the charting of, like, progressive ideals and changing sympathies and what have you. And so when you think of Fleming, who is kind of this like semi-disgruntled spy adjacent paper pusher who kind of like didn't like what he was writing about, there's like so much animosity in the prose, and it like bleeds into like all of the words. So like by the time he gets to the movies, Like, well, at least they're like having fun. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like, that's like
exactly.
a huge improvement, you know?
Just to bring it back to Fleming, of course, his decision to end Bond is very short-lived. By 1957, he's already begun to run out of money from the books,
Right.
and he starts work on the 6th book, Dr. No. Obviously, Bond lives.
What?
That's right. Dr. No is the book after, right? That's
Yes, yeah. So parts of the book are based on a trip Fleming took as a journalist to Istanbul and his trip back to England on the Orient Express. He also received a letter in 1956 from a 31-year-old Bond enthusiast and gun expert, Geoffrey Boothroyd, who criticized the use of Bond's .25 Beretta. And this is where the idea from Dr. No that it's a, quote, ladies' gun. Great. Thanks, Geoffrey Boothroyd. And he suggested that Bond should carry a 38 or a 9mm German Walther PPK. Now, it's too late for this to make its way into From Russia with Love, but Fleming likes this idea so much that he actually creates the character of Boothroyd in the novels, who gives Bond his PPK, which was introduced in the last film.
and in the novel, it's like a whole discussion.
Oh yeah, and it is in Dr. No as well too.
Right,
That's
right,
essentially
right.
the gadget scene in that movie.
Mhm.
When it comes to the film, obviously the first one was a huge success, not with critics as we mentioned last time, but with the public. And United Artists immediately greenlights a sequel for $2 million this time instead of $1 million, plus a bonus of $100,000 for Connery himself on top of his $54,000 salary. Can you imagine the star of a movie nowadays getting paid $154,000? That's
Well,
wild.
did you look at what is it in inflation?
Oh, the inflation's wild.
Yeah, you're right. It's actually not that much. It's only like it's still under 2 million, right? Unless my computer calculus is wrong, but I don't think it is.
Converted to pounds for me. No.
Yes. No, but I guess in terms of the amount of the budget, I suppose. But even to that point, you're right. Nowadays, it's way higher. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Like,
well, you have the Russo brothers making $3 billion movies for Netflix or whatever. So like,
well, that's a whole. I mean, you're seeing that in real time. Movies like, this is a very recent story as we're recording, but that Apple TV Plus movie Wolves,
yes,
in which, as reported, Brad Pitt and George Clooney got $30 million each.
Yeah,
right, and that's before you're like closing locations and like hiring key grips and you know what I mean, like. So I'm gonna say it. It's unsustainable. I'm just gonna go out and say it. It's an unsustainable model right now. So we'll see what happens. But
can you imagine the indie that could be made for $30 million?
I mean, 10, 10 good, well-made indies. Yeah, no question. Yeah.
President Kennedy also lists From Russia with Love on his list of all-time favorite books in Life magazine, so it's a pretty easy decision for Broccoli and Saltzman to adapt it as the next film. And they're able to return several key members of the crew for the second film, with some notable exceptions, especially Ken Adams, who Stanley Kubrick poached to do the sets for Dr. Strangelove, based off his work solely in Dr. No. He's replaced by Sid Kane, who I believe was a scenic designer on the first film. Maurice Binder is also busy, and he's replaced by Robert Brownjohn in the opening credits, and John Barry fully replaces Monty Norman on the score. I think what's interesting, too, the idea of one-upping each other, and I think that, Chels, you will see this in the later films. I think Ken Adams does an amazing job with Dr. No. I think he then sees the sets that Sid Kane does from Russia, and he's like, fuck, I gotta top that. And it's the same thing with when Maurice Binder returns to do the credits. I think, like, listen, Robert Brownjohn's credits are basically like a bunch of women gyrating, so it's not like that much of a step up, but I do think it is one of those things where Maurice Binder is like, oh, I guess I gotta start doing that now.
To be fair, it's amazing what you can do with money.
Yes, it's true.
So true. You double that budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We also get some new additions to the James Bond film lore. We get the first pre-title cold open, as you mentioned before, Dan, and we are introduced to the character of Ernst Blofeld, who's credited as number 1 in the movie and simply labeled ? In the credits.
At the end, I know, it's so good.
And that's basically because he's physically being played by the professor that Connery killed in the last movie. And so, just don't want to give him the credit again so people would be like, oh, that character is back. It's kind of smart on their part. We also get the very first use of a theme song, though it doesn't play over the opening credits this time. And we get the famous James Bond will return at the end. And this one, specifically shouts out the next film, Goldfinger, which is funny because that's not always going to happen.
Yeah, they must have... Did they know they were making... I mean, I guess they did, right?
Oh, I mean, it's too much of a moneymaker for them to not. In an attempt to avoid being too political, because of the real Soviet undercover agency Smerch actually existing, and it's the villain in the novel, they use Spectre to carry over from the first film. Joanna Harwood and Richard Maybaum return as screenwriters from the first movie. I once again shout out to Joanna Harwood because she's the reason the first two films are closer to the novel, though she leaves production because Terrence Young keeps rewriting her work on the fly. Maybaum stays on, and he is the one who ends up adding Red Grant to all the Istanbul scenes and peppering him throughout the film, as well as adding the two late film action sequences that take up most of the last half of the movie. Most of the main cast returns, but Peter Burton's unavailable to return as Major Boothroyd, and the role goes to Welsh actor Desmond Llewellyn. He's never addressed by Boothroyd in this movie, but he is mentioned as being from the Q branch, and that's the birth of Q.
The rest is history.
Exactly. In terms of our leading lady that you brought up, Chels, before, the competition's pretty stiff. Elga Gimba Anderson was almost cast in the role, but according to the book Some Kind of Hero, 007, the remarkable story of the James Bond films by Matthew Field and A.J. Chowdhury, she's fired for turning down an offer to sleep with an unnamed United Artists executive.
Yikes.
Yeah.
It really tracks for the time. Every problematic man works on these films, let's be real.
And it's so wild that that I just can't. Why does anybody think that shit's acceptable?
I mean, anyway. It was sadly, I think I would not even thought of twice, right?
No.
Back then. You know what I mean?
I'm sure no one batted an eye.
Right.
They probably thought she was being difficult for not doing it.
I mean, clearly, right? I mean,
yeah.
She lost a job. It's
Miss Universe 1960 runner-up Daniela Bianchi is chosen, supposedly by Connery himself, but she, of course, doesn't speak English and is later dubbed by British actress Barbara Jefford in the final film. Lotte Lenya, the Austrian singer and widow of composer Kurt Weill, R.I.P., is cast after Terrence Young hears her on a record, essentially. And John Ford recommends Mexican actor Pedro Armendariz to play the role of Turkish Kerem Bey. And the rest of the cast is rounded out by Robert Shaw as Red Grant and Vladek Scheibel as Chessmaster Kronstein, a role Sean Connery's girlfriend, Diane Silanto, had to convince him to take. I want to know more about that. Why would you not want to be in a James Bond film? But
I think they were regarded as cheap when they were coming out, initially. I mean, Connery talks pretty openly about that, and as his career went on, right? And he, the fight afterwards to remain a movie star. I think it is these.
They're kind of like fun trash.
I really do think they were B pictures that made A picture money, right? So it was you were holding two things in your hand at the same time, and I think I would imagine more than any other franchise, this paves the way for franchises, right? I mean,
yes.
Is there another example that even comes close? No, right?
Truly not. And I also think that, you're right. They are B movies, but I think not only do they make A talent, but they cast A people behind the scenes as well.
True, that's a good point. Yeah.
Because I do think Terrence Young's direction is really beautiful at points, but also really economical, I want to say.
So I think Terrence's contribution to the film, in a kind of salvage situation where we had to get something done. He knew what he was trying to do, and succeeded fantastically well.
I loved Terence. I really did. He was just great.
I rate Terence Young as one of the best directors I've ever worked with.
And he always took charge and completely took care of us.
He called everybody my children.
He said, come along, children, come along.
And not only did he call you my child, but he behaved as if you were his child. It was very comforting.
I think Peter R. Hunt's editing especially is like really smart. And I mean, I don't know if we would have modern day film action editing the way that we have it. And obviously there's been plenty of progress since him, but without the style that Peter Hunt really introduces in James Bond. And we even said in the last episode, in the Dr. No episode, like he was basically trying to avoid people getting bored.
Yeah, I mean, look, I thought about this rewatching From Russia with Love. One of the coolest things about most of the Bond movies, and I guess you could parse this, as we get more to the modern day, the casts are small.
Yeah.
They are small casts. It's like, it's Bond, he goes, sees M, he flirts with Moneypenny, she flirts back, he gets a mission. There's like a conduit guy, whether it's Felix Leiter or Karen Bay or whoever it is. And then it's like a villain and the henchman and the Bond girls, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like,
At most, you have 6 people you have to care about throughout the entire film.
And I think to your point, that the books are like that to some degree, and the franchise started that way with Dr. No. And I think, at least for a good long while, you get that economy in fits and starts, and I think it helps. Yeah, I do think it helps. Yeah.
Do we count the first Bond girl as 1 or 2 people, because this is 2 movies in a row where the main Bond girl is dubbed over?
Was Ursula Andress was dubbed?
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Right. That
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah.
There is a lot of lip syncing for your life in these films. Definitely early on. And trust me, nobody is walking away with that grand prize of $100,000.
No. This one and the second movie, much better than the first. Bless her heart.
Yeah. And I do really like her. I think there's an innocence she brings to the role, but we'll get to that in the but
she's a thirsty girl.
She's a thirsty girl. I feel like so much thirstier than even in the book, which is funny because she's way more sexual in the book, but less interesting.
It's true. It's so true. You're right. Yeah.
I do want to talk real quick about this really sad thing that happens on the set. Unfortunately, due to a terminal cancer diagnosis, they had to shoot all of Pedro Armendariz' scenes first, leaving Terence Young to act as a stand-in for later scenes. After wrapping, basically looping his lines, doing the 2 weeks of shooting and becoming increasingly weak, Armendariz checks himself into a California hospital, lets them pump him full of painkillers, and when he's left alone, takes out a pistol he smuggled into the hospital room and ends his own life. And he basically did Bond just so he could leave the money to his family. It's really tragic because I think he's amazing in this film.
Oh, he's
really good. He's so
great.
hot.
Yeah.
I'm like always interested in what he specifically is doing. I want to know more about him and his family.
And he I think there's a big transition between his character from the book, who actually has a slightly different name, than to the film, because he feels so much more like a creep in the book. It feels like he's like really sexually aggressive. And in the movie, it almost feels like women just can't help but throw themselves at him, which I like that better, where he's kind of like, well, let me read my paper. Like,
it makes so much more sense to me, because I'm like, sometimes you just see a fun little rich hottie and you're like, let's hang out with him.
One of the best things about his performance is he juxtaposes Connery. There's such a clear, and this is like this is probably not the appropriate vernacular now, but it's like an Eastern Western thing where an Englishman in Turkey, and Karen Bay's whole thing of like, hey man, you're in Turkey. Everybody knows everybody's a spy. I got a little secret canal. Don't worry about it. My son will drive you. I love being a spy. And it's like that energy, that just opens the movie up. So honestly, Dr. No doesn't have enough of that. And I feel like one of the things I like about From Russia is when he enters, you're just kind of like, hell yeah, like let's have a little fun, let's let our hair down a little bit. Yeah.
The point about how spying is different in Turkey is also really interesting. While the film is quite the globe-hopping production, in contrast to Dr. No, they still have to film 70% of the movie in Great Britain or Commonwealth in order to get the tax break to keep the costs low.
Right.
Ian Fleming actually does come to the set. He's invited to the set in Istanbul, and he spends about a week there, quote unquote, supervising production. Everybody has said that, like, oh yeah, he walked around, like, made sure. I'm sure it wasn't like an official position, guys. I'm sorry.
He's walking around with a daiquiri in his hand, having a good old time, thinking about how he's going to spend his money. And like, for a cranky old bastard, good for him.
The Sid Kane added to the cost with his production design. The brief chess scene at the beginning costs $150,000 alone. That, I will admit, is my favorite set in the movie, though. As soon as it shows up, it's so cool.
You can see the money, but wow.
Oh yeah, and they even had to pay like a person to paint in the ceiling because there was no ceiling, and so they had to like bring in a person to paint the ceiling in post.
That's fascinating. Wow.
Yeah.
See where the money was spent.
Oh, absolutely.
Worth it.
He also ends up throwing in a free promo for another Eon production, making the billboard sequence that takes place in the book. There's a poster in which a person tries to escape through the mouth. It's like a secret hatch. In the film, it's Call Me Buana, which is another Eon production. In the novel, it's a Marilyn Monroe poster. I almost wish it was still a Marilyn Monroe poster because, like, who remembers Call Me Buana?
Especially for JFK's favorite book.
Yes, I thought that too.
That's a great point. Is it not Bridget Bardot though?
No, it's not. It's
not. Okay.
I can't think of her name. I should have put it in my notes.
No, I'm gonna look it up. Keep going.
Okay.
The web connects us all.
Peter Hunt returns as editor, and because the production was moving so fast, he had to move into post-production without a majority of the film having been shot. And actually, this is kind of really interesting because I think the movie, as an editor, I wouldn't want to do this, but I think it actually helps the movie out. He's able to rearrange scenes to make them more exciting. And so that's why we get that great opening sequence where Red Grant is training to kill Bond, because originally that was supposed to come after Rosa Klebb goes to Spectre Island, picks him, and has already spoken to Tatiana.
The film is over budget and over schedule. Almost every major scene is still missing key footage. Some scenes, filmed before final rewrites, no longer mesh with the script. With less than 3 months until the film is scheduled to premiere, some feel the second James Bond film could turn out to be a disaster. Terence Young has confidence. He gives editor Peter Hunt carte blanche to begin shaping the material.
It wasn't beautifully storyboarded and shot together, so you had to make it work. You had to work at it.
Hunt and Young decide to place the titles after the opening sequence, which begins the tradition of the James Bond pre-title teaser. Peter Hunt rearranges many of the early scenes. Originally, Rosa Klebb visited Spectre Island, then recruited Tatiana Romanova, followed by the chess tournament, and finally the meeting with Blofeld, where we discover the plot. Hunt opens with the chess match, then shows us the meeting with Blofeld so that we understand Klebb's visit to Spectre Island and her meeting with Tatiana.
And you understand everything that's going on just through the implication of the way it's laid out, but it's not linear in a way that it was meant to be in the original script. I think I know I'm talking him up a lot, but I truly think Peter Hunt was a genius, and he just seemed like, anytime you watch any behind the scenes stuff, he's like, just seems like blue collar bloke. Just like one of the great stories is Terrence Young came in. He'd been working on the scene in which Q brings him the exploding briefcase, and he's like, "Oh yeah, have you worked on that scene yet?" And he's like, "Yeah, come in, I'll show it to you." And he starts playing in the scene. Connery goes to open the briefcase, and it immediately cuts to the exploding hideout from Dr. No, and then the end credits from Dr. No. It said Terrence Young nearly fell out of his chair with laughter. So I
Good
just
old
think
Pete.
Yeah, he's great.
And let me just say, I believe it was Anita Ekberg, because she's the star of that movie. Yeah.
Call Me Buana.
Call Me Buana.
The theme song for the film was composed by Lionel Bart of Oliver fame. Boo, boo. And it's sung by Matt Monroe. John Barry, and I know that you watched the commentary for this, Dan. John Barry took little to no Turkish inspiration for the score because he felt that Turkish music had a comedic tone that did not fit the, quote, dramatic feeling of a James Bond movie. The film is... I wild to be like an entire culture's music.
I'm trying to think the commentary. I can't remember who, like, it must be a journalist or something. I think he reads a quote from Barry where he's basically like, yeah, me and Terrence went out there and we listened to some music. Didn't like it. It's like literally like the quote is just like,
yeah, I think
it's the most like aristocratic, like reductive, like it just like went out there. Yeah, they had a lot of fun playing that music. It looked like not for us. and you just like, okay, dude, it's so funny.
Great. It's a very British.
John Barry. Yeah.
The film also uses the first use of Barry's piece of music called Just 007. It's an action piece of music that has come to be seen as the, quote, secondary James Bond theme. I love this piece of music. And anytime that they bring it back into the movies in the later ones, even though it feels very time and place, it feels very 60s. I'm down. I'm down for it whenever it shows up.
It's a dun 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 dun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. That's the Monty Norman James Bond theme.
What
it's the which sounds, when I do it, sounds more Western, but it's not. So.
I mean, there's something to be said about James Bond and Westerns and connecting all of that together. But yeah.
Yeah, that's true, actually, in a way, because the Brits don't really have the Wild West. And so they, I mean,
it's a stretch. It's a little stretchy. It's a little stretchy, but you could.
I can see it.
You could get there.
From Russia with Love premiered on October 10th, 1963, and then didn't premiere in the United States until April 8th of 1964, which is a little late for something that I'll tell you in a moment. But it ends up earning $12.5 million at the worldwide box office and doubling Dr. No's gross. And it ends up being the most popular movie at the British box office in 1963. Ted Moore, who is the cinematographer, ends up winning the BAFTA award and the British Society of Cinematographers award for best cinematography. And the film is also nominated for a Golden Globe for the theme song from Russia with Love. Contemporary reviews didn't love the movie. Once again, they still are like trashy, like scandalous. But there were some more positive notices at the time. And several modern reviews have come to say that it's their favorite Bond film, including some notable modern Bond players, such as producers Michael G. Wilson, Barbara Broccoli, and later Bond actors Timothy Dalton and Daniel Craig. I think it's also fascinating that I found a quote where Michael G. Wilson says, for all that they've tried as they took on the Bond films, they usually start out trying to make From Russia with Love and end up making Thunderball. And
that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that quote. And then just to tie this all back to Kennedy, I promise this is the last episode we'll probably get to talk about Kennedy, because From Russia with Love is the last film President John F. Kennedy sees at the White House, because it played there on November 20th, 1963, the night before he leaves for Dallas.
What happened in Dallas?
There was a parade. That's
wait a minute.
Yeah, that's all I remember. So
an outdoor parade?
Yeah.
You wouldn't put him in a convertible.
Not near the Knolls.
That was Natalie Portman. Don't worry.
The president?
All right. Why don't we get into talking about the movie itself? We start off with our very famous gun barrel. Once again, Sean Connery will not be participating in the gun barrel. And this time it fades away. I think in later films you'll get the moment where it like opens up from the following scene. But this is just, technology's not there yet. So unlike Dr. No, we start physically on Connery which in Dr. No, they waited a while. And also in contrast to the book, because as you were mentioning, Dan, he doesn't show up for the first 100 pages in the book.
It's literally, I believe, because I was reading it again today, I believe it's like page 74.
Oh, wow. In my copy, it was 103.
Really?
So, yeah.
Because I have literally from the library, I think an original.
That's amazing.
Like an original, published thing. And it's like 190 pages, right? And the chapter, whatever that chapter is, because it's basically like 75 pages of like, Red Grant, Rosa Klebb, Smersh talking. And then they literally, and I almost wish they had a larger, this scene in the movie, because it's like just funny, where like Smersh is like, who should we try to kill? Should we try to kill an American spy?
Yeah.
What about an Italian spy? Nah. What about? What do you think? What about it? And they go through. He's like, no, France sucks. We're not going to do France. And then finally,
they like name check Mathis. There's like a guy named Mathis, and they're like, no,
whatever.
No.
And then they're like, there is this one fucking guy.
Yeah.
There's this one guy in the UK, and then they like list all of the books. They're like, yeah, he fucked up that thing we did in space. He messed up. They reference like Moonraker, and they're like, yeah, let's kill James Bond. They're like, vote on it. It's hysterical.
My other favorite thing in that passage in the book is they're like, surely he would never be famous in Britain because no one who's a spy could possibly be liked by the people. And I was like, come to America. Like people
funny.
Here fucking love cops. It's the weirdest thing.
It's like all that Fleming stuff is so great, where he's like his confidence in what he knows and his hatred for it, just like sitting next to each other, is just, it made for hit books, it's just a funny thing to read. Anyway, yeah.
Connery's Bond is now wandering around an ornate hedge garden, alert to the fact that he's being followed. He fires at his blonde pursuer, but misses, and before he can get off a second shot, Bond is dead, strangled by his tow-headed pursuer. The lights shine, and it's revealed to be a decoy, a man with a mustache, a test, and the trumpets carry us into the credits. We're still in our orchestral theme era, as From Russia with Love transitions into the Bond theme. I think it's interesting that they're doing this thing where it's like music, tits, ass, and then the Bond theme. We ended the title sequence, and once again, title sequence is fringe, tits, words projected over women's bodies, and before we know it, we're in Venice for a chess championship.
Oh, right.
Beautiful set. One of the players is called away by a mysterious note with a familiar Spectre logo. And from there, we are properly introduced to Spectre, Blofeld and Rosa Klebb, number 3. We also discover that the chess player is named Kronstein, and he's Spectre agent number 5, a master planner. The plan uses a beautiful young agent to quote-unquote defect with the promise of giving the British a decoder. This is a ruse that will be used to kill Britain's top agent, James Bond, as an act of revenge for killing Dr. No. Once again, it's weird to have this like direct connection, and also like I think it also places this weird like Dr. No, yes, very rich, clearly, but he was basically like a guy that was just like, yeah, I'm out for myself. And to find out this whole agency was like, no, we really liked him. We really
They really liked his giant fish, giant goldfish.
They like the cut of his jib.
Exactly.
This doctrine, secret island. We'll make a note.
Lost his hands to radiation. I feel it.
So I forgot. I rewatching it. I was like, I forgot. He's like, when he like lifts up those black gloves. He's like,
yeah,
it doesn't come without its price. You're like, what, dude? What happened? What did you do to your hands, dude?
Good old fake Asian robot hands. We miss him.
Yep.
Oh my God. Hysterical.
Also, once again, wild that the first James Bond movie, the villain has robot hands, and it's like totally not, no one bats an eye.
No.
We're officially introduced to Red Grant, Bond's would-be assassin from the cold open. He's being massaged by a young, buxom blonde, and trust me, he looks great. I was like, Yeah. It's so funny to think of him as
Robert
Wind.
Shaw, yeah.
Yeah, from Jaws. Like it's like this is the guy that
Yeah.
But
And even to think it's not that many years.
No, truly not.
It's like a decade and a year. It's like 12 years.
And he's like suddenly an old man.
Yeah.
And he's like
drawing big sharks on chalkboards and whatnot.
They didn't have the HGH back then to like it was not on sets easily.
I will tell you something though, and we don't need to go down a rabbit hole, but like, can we bring back the idolized male body that is those bodies? That is like Red Grant, that is Sean Connery, where it's just like, I mean, even like John Hamm in Mad Men, right?
Yeah.
Like that was one of the best things that show did, which is probably my favorite show. But like back then, that was like an ideal, like this world we live in of like whatever you call like these men,
sexless superheroes.
Like you see every muscle. I'm like, who? Why? Why are we
And that's
doing
the crazy thing, because it used to be like soap operas were the unattainable hot men, and now it's kind of like your John Hams, your men with chest hair who aren't perfect, but it's like, ooh, I want some of that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. And even like it's gotten to the point now in our like whatever in our content, cursed word. Like me and my wife watched the Presumed Innocent show, right?
Okay.
And Jake Gyllenhaal is a lawyer. Okay. And he's like taking off his shirt and I'm like, are you a boxer on the side? Like,
was this filmed before, during, or after Roadhouse?
Well, but this is my point. There's not even like any pretension. It's just like, whatever. People just look like this now, I guess. And I'm like, they do not. I was like, do not try to convince me that like Chicago lawyers are like ripped. I know he's Jake Gyllenhaal, but come on.
They all need to drink some water. They're all so dehydrated.
And you end up watching a show like that being like, it's Peter Sarsgaard who's hot, right? Like that's, you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's like, it's just so funny,
It's
man.
like, it's okay, babes. Just like eat some mac and cheese, drink some water.
Have a beer, sit down.
Grow some chest hair. It's okay to have hair.
It's okay to have hair.
That's well said. Yeah. It's okay to have hair.
I'm just thinking about hairy Sean Connery.
Beautiful.
Kleb goes over Red's file, and it's official. He's insane. I just love how casually it's just like, oh, he's crazy. Great.
So good.
He's crazy. Love him.
And then special shout out to Spectre Island, their like training ground, as they like bringing her around, and it's one of those. It feels almost like a Naked Gun scene, to the extent of just like people doing jiu-jitsu, like firing arrows, shooting guns, and whatnot. It's like, what's happening here? Come on, guys.
One little special commentary thing is that was a very small set, and it was like kind of a last minute idea that I think Terrence Young had. And so they just walk back and forth.
Yes.
So it's like, if you watch the movie, it's just that one like row, and they just redress it. So it's like, it's like the flamethrower and then the guns, and then they go back, and it's so funny. It's like,
that's
but I
amazing.
love it. I mean, that's the shit that I think makes this movie a kind of a cut above a little bit. I love that stuff. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Kleb gives Red Grant a once over, and she brass knuckle punches him in the stomach, and she's like, he'll do. I think what's really funny, a difference between films and novels, is that in the novel it describes like the pain that Red goes through, but doesn't show it. And in the movie you don't get that. So he's just like, like, that's it. And from there, we're off to Istanbul to be introduced to Tatiana Romanova. She is Bond's seducer, if she can pass Robokleb's sexy job interview. It's funny, Chels and I talked about this scene, which she hadn't seen at the time, in our very first episode. Now that you've seen it, how did you feel about that? And let me tell you, it's much more graphic in the book.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy. If I ever decide to learn how to read. I really liked this scene, and like, I know asexual means something different now, but I did read this person as like almost like voluntarily asexual in a way, because she just seems so committed to her job, but is also like, I'm gonna judge, is she sexy enough to seduce this person, Miss And I really loved it. It adds a little extra flavor to these movies because yes, it's like now it's like not correct in many ways, but also it's like perfectly deranged in that very silly way that you want these kind of silly movies to be.
Now, these are your instructions. You report to me here. Yes. But the consulate security man must not know that I'm in Istanbul. This is classified far above his level.
I will say nothing to anyone.
If you do, you will be shot. Come, my dear. You are very fortunate to have been chosen for such a simple, delightful duty. A real labor of love.
I think she's also just great in the role, Lottie Lenya. Like, she's
so
just...
good.
And again, it's sort of like the Karen Bay character of like, she's hitting all the right notes. Like, she's kind of aware that she's a cartoon, and therefore she's like, oh yeah, cool. This is what we're going to do.
She commits to the cartoonery of it all. And that's why I'm here for it.
In a rare diegetic sound surprise, we're treated to Matt Monroe's version of the movie's theme song, which is on the radio, as Bond relaxes shirtless lakeside with returning girlfriend Sylvia Trench. His beeper goes off, because they had those in the 60s. I was like, he has a fucking beeper? Like, and he uses his fancy car phone, once again, spy-fi technology, to contact the Home Office. Sylvia is jealous of his job. Moneypenny is jealous of Sylvia, and Bond makes sure he has enough time to finish his picnic before heading to M's office.
Tom Cruise, Oprah.
Yeah.
Click, click,
snap,
click.
snap, snap.
Snap.
The only thing being eaten for lunch is Sylvia.
Oh, good for her. Woman after my heart.
So we're meant to. So Sylvia Trench, she repoed back to England from Jamaica.
Yeah. Yeah, she's fine. Well, no, she was in. She never went to Jamaica. She like was in England.
That's right.
Yeah.
She's
at
in the casino. Is in England.
and then she's showing up in his.
My sincerest apologies, of course.
I mean,
like 6 months later, it's like, oh, come on, let's hook up right now. Can't wait yet.
It is really funny because I do like the fact that she truly says, I haven't seen you in 6 months, and she's like, but I'm DTF, you know, like. Just to get back to the office, Bond walks in, throws his hat. M's like, we have no time for this flirting. And I didn't mention in the previous episode, but we get Bernard Lee as M, who is returning from the last film as well. He's very good at the no-nonsense boss of Bond. He alerts him that there is an agent named Romanova who will defect with the decoder only if it's in the care of Bond himself, who she claims she is fallen in love with. Based on his picture alone, I guess. M calls
Was this a shirtless picture? Because then I would understand.
That's what it is. I that's the one thing that I think is like they brush off so quickly. They're just like, yeah, she's in love with you, and he's like, what? What's happening?
Well, but correct me if I'm wrong. In the movie, I did appreciate that M was. Correct me. Doesn't M say? It's probably a trap, but go anyway. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, Bond and him are both like, trap.
Hardnet, Shyamalan, trap. Let's go. Let's do it.
M calls for the equipment master, and we meet Q, though he won't get that moniker for another film. Bond is given a loaded suitcase, which includes knives, money, a sniper rifle, and even tear gas if he clicks open the case in the wrong way. Bond lands in Istanbul, and in a repeat of Dr. No, he's picked up, but this time, through clever code play, he knows that his ride is on the level. Too bad he's once again followed. Bulgarians working for the Russians, and he is immediately told spying is different here in Turkey, as, quote, we follow them, they follow us. It's sort of an understanding we have. We mentioned that earlier. I love that concept. I love the mundanity of their espionage. That it's just like, listen, it's not all about super spies, hidden gadgets, watches. Sometimes it's like just people surveilling each other, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most fun things about the Bond movies is the not American stuff, because it's like, even one of the coolest things about all these nations, and I know this is all fictional, but it's like these nations have been around so much longer than America. So it's like the exhaustion of just time and conflicts just results in these different nations being like, look, we've been conquered 40 times. People are watching us. We're watching them. Don't worry about it. And I just love, and then like when America is part of the stories, it's always regarded as like these upstarts, they got fancy stuff and money, whatever. And I just love that. I like that energy is so refreshing, I feel like.
We as an audience are introduced to Karim Bey. Bond is brought to his office, and we find out that all of Karim Bey's many agents are his sons because he's a prolific daddy.
A daddy indeed.
Yeah, he truly is. And once again, I don't think I can say enough about this role and the way it's played. It's so much fun. It breathes such a life into this movie in a way that I think, Felix Leiter and I like the character of Felix Leiter, but in Dr. No is such a wet blanket, and Karim Bey is not that at all.
So true.
Bond retires to his hotel and again tips the staff. What a guy. Yeah. I love that Bond keeps doing that. A man of the people. He inspects the room for bugs and he knows it's wired. And so he asks for a room change. While Bond is being brought to the bridal suite, we go back to Bay's, where one of his paramour is attempting to seduce him back to bed, wearing a dress that matches the sheets in the bed, which I was like looking at.
She made that dress with the sheets.
I know that's... She was so bored waiting for him to come back to bed.
She's a seamstress. She was like...
Yeah. Karim Bey's office is attacked, and there's a great exchange when Bond shows back up again, where Bond it's like, oh, you're having a lunch, sort of. And Karim Bey's like, oh yes, the girl left in hysterics. And Bond says, oh, is your technique too violent?
A flawless Connery.
Oh,
Gavin.
I thank you. Men, come on, men.
I cannot understand the sudden breach of the truce. It's unlike our Russian friends to break the peace this way.
Most inconsiderate. I think my visit might have something to do with it.
Let's try and find out.
Bey introduces Bond to the watery catacombs underneath his office, and it's basically a good way for him to get out unnoticed, but it includes a periscope installed for spying on the Russians, which brilliant. So they watch the Russians for a bit. They get to see Tatiana. They get to see the Lecter, which is the code-breaking machine. And so they know all of this is at least somewhat on the level, and Bond starts formulating a plan. Bey brings Bond to the countryside to lead Bond in the protection of the Roma people in his employ. I know we keep using the word gypsy, sort of an outmoded word at this point.
Right.
So I will be referring to them as Roma. Do either of you do as you wish,
Wait, what do you refer? What are you referring to?
Roma, Roma.
Oh, is that the preferred terminology?
Yes.
Oh, I don't think I knew that.
Oh, yeah.
Roma. Okay, good to know.
So I'm actually still a little perplexed by this. And even in the book, it feels a little just like I'm bringing you to a place just so we can have another scene. Does it feel like that to either of you? Like,
oh, 100%, 1,000%.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, once again, it's a great set, but it's still just kind of like, oh, here's a thing we're doing.
Now, in fairness, a lot of the Bond movies have stuff. I mean, you said this before.
Yeah.
Like, so it's once again, when you're talking about the tropes of this movie that like bleed into, because this is a lot, even if the critics didn't like it at the time, it is a beloved movie by the people moving forward. Like these like interstitial scenes, like they exist in almost every Bond movie. So I just love the idea of this being the first of those, of like,
yeah,
let's just take a little intermission. We'll go check these people out. And then it's so fun. Oh, one thing I wanted, because I just have to mention this. In the book, the device is called Spectre.
Yes.
Which I just think is funny. And they obviously take that, make it the name of the organization. And then in the movie, they call it Lecter, which I love it.
Spectre itself has a really complicated history with Bond, and we're probably going to get into it more around Thunderball.
Right.
But it comes from the Kevin McClory stuff and whatnot. I'm really excited for Chels to hear about all of the lawsuits that start happening.
And it's really, and it's really just like one lawsuit, like reinterpreted over many years. It's like
it lasts for like 25 years, 30 years. It's great.
Yeah, it's insane.
So he brings him to this countryside for the Roma people, and luckily they're just in time to eat and view the night's entertainment, which is two women who'll be fighting over a man. But first, belly dancing. It's funny because Karen Bay introduces him to this idea. He's like, these women, they're gonna fight over this man, but first we're just gonna take a brief moment to watch a lady do something sexy. Bond's like, great, love that.
It feels very like they're trying to make it seem exotic, a little barbaric in many ways. And I am just like, we're really just going to watch these two women fight to the death over some man.
Well, here's what's wild. I had originally written in my notes, like, fight to the death. And then I was like, wait a second, they're not fighting to the death. So, like, what even is the point? Like, what do you, like...
Do we know that they're not fighting to the death? Or did we not get far enough?
Oh,
well, because they get interrupted, right?
Yes, they do. Well, that brings us to the next set piece. Bond is not safe. The Russians have followed. They attack during the women's fight, and we get our first taste of the adventure theme, the previous mentioned adventure theme. I love this action sequence. Once again, I know it's kind of superfluous, but I think it's really cool because
it's really well done. It looks like a real movie.
It's so choreographed. There's so many moving parts. And I love watching, Bay gets hurt. Bay gets shot during this. And Bond is starting to use the surroundings to his advantages, but he doesn't see a man coming up behind him. And Red Grant kills a man because he wants Bond for himself later on, which I think adds to the kind of queerness of Red's character.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
We will definitely
we
talk about that.
We should have actually gotten to that earlier, because that's like...
They definitely need to kiss.
Yeah.
Robert Shaw playing it, whether you knew it or not, as like, I would like to fuck James Bond.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And if it was Daniel Craig, I feel like Daniel Craig would be down.
Yeah.
Oh, star of New York Film Festival's queer?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
He's down.
He's down.
He's married to bisexual icon. Come on.
Oh my God.
Disobedience
Disobedience is own. Rachel Weisz.
Oh.
Underrated picture. Anyway,
so good.
But I do really like that scene because it is like gross guardian angel nonsense where he's just kind of like, if I can't have Bond, no one will, and it's very fun.
Totally.
So they kill all the Russians, I guess, casual, and Bond is left to decide which of the women is the victor in the fight, and it's implied that he ends up fucking both of them.
Well,
essentially,
Karen Bay is like, you decide, have sex with them both. Let me know. Hey,
hey, I'll see you outside.
He can't choose. He's like, why not both? Like,
yeah, exactly.
A El Paso commercial.
Oh God. Oh, James.
He leaves the company of the two women and collects his suitcase sniper rifle, which leads him and Bay to discover a secret escape hatch in the mouth of Anita Ekberg from a massive poster of Call Me Buona Synergy. Bay fires, killing his opponent, and Bond quips that she should have kept her mouth shut.
Hey-o.
Okay, Bond. Like, come on. It's really hard for me to defend
so
you.
Much worse, dude.
Yeah, I know.
The one-liners get so much worse.
Bond goes back to his hotel, but he's not alone. His first clue, perfume. He starts to disrobe before hearing something, and he finds a very naked Romanova in his bed, waiting for him. It's the "my mouth is too big" scene.
So you're Tatiana Romanova.
My friends call me Tanya.
Mine call me James Bond. Well, now that we've been properly introduced.
Careful. Guns upset me.
I'm sorry. I'm a bit upset myself.
You look just like your photograph.
You're one of the most beautiful girls I've ever seen.
Thank you. But I think my mouth is too big.
No, it's the right size. For me, that is.
What do you think about that? So famously, this scene goes on to become the way that they audition every single Bond woman after this movie.
That's right.
They bring in people to do the scene. They even audition future Bonds. Sam Neill famously had to screen test using this scene, and who ends up not playing Bond. What is it about this scene that just feels so iconic that the Eon productions people just can't get away from it. Is it the classic sexism? Or like what is happening in this scene that like makes it seem
Can
like
you
the
make
ultimate?
sexism charming?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the dismount is difficult, right? Like the degree of difficulty is high.
Mm-hmm.
Right, Chels?
Yes.
I mean, that's what you're saying, Chels, right? It's like, can you be charming being the fucking shittiest dude in the world? You know,
Right.
like, which is, I think, kind of always the line they're walking with Bond, you know?
And she has to play both sides of both the, like, she's the prey and the pursuer in a way, too.
The Tatiana Romanov, like that whole character is kind of interesting for a Bond girl, kind of, because it's like, she's double-crossing Bond because she thinks Rosa Klebb is part of Smurf, but
Right.
actually she's working for Spectre. But Tatiana doesn't know that, so she's getting played. And then also she falls in love with Bond, and for
Right.
real. So it's like there's three separate things happening at the same time, you know, which is hard. It's hard. Yeah, I think Daniela Bianchi's good, actually.
Oh yeah, I actually really like her in the scene,
Yeah.
and I think once again it's a really difficult job to have to be like, I'm a woman so confident that I would willingly get naked into a bed with a man and then be like, no, we're not, we're you know, because she tries to like sort of keep him at bay at first before it's weird to be aggressively playing hard to get. like
And like, she
I want this,
doesn't-
but don't touch me.
And like, she also, unless I'm correct me here, she doesn't know they're being filmed either.
No, she does not.
So it's like, that's a whole nother thing, right? It's
Yeah.
like, you know, and that's another when you're talking about the Red Grant,
Yeah.
him and Rosa Klebb just watching Bond bone out. And like, you're like, what? Red, you didn't have to be there, Red. You could have been in your room. You didn't have to be watching.
But what
He was
else
getting
has she got?
ideas for later.
Exactly. Did did it look like that hotel had TVs? Like she's got nothing to watch that night.
So well said.
They kiss, but Bond hurts her feelings a little because he clearly only cares about the decoder. But it's not enough to not sleep with him. And as you previously mentioned, Klebb and Grant are behind the mirror recording every single thrust. The next day, Romanova goes to her office and sneaks out a blueprint, but is almost intercepted until Red kills another Russian agent. So at this point, Red has killed, 4 Russian agents on screen? Like, he has a bigger body count than Bond does when it comes to killing his own villains.
Right.
Bay warns Bond against falling for Tatiana because he wants him to remember it's a trap. Like, come on, Bond, you're smarter than this. The next day on a boat, James asks Tatiana about the decoder and records her using his camera recorder, which is being listened to by M and Moneypenny. And it begins to embarrass M as it gets a little too flirty.
So good.
I love that he orders Moneypenny out of the office because it's kind of like, women shouldn't listen to this. And then Moneypenny immediately is like, I'm fucking horny, and just turns it on. And
then they call her out on it.
Yeah, they're like, oh, I guess you're still listening, huh?
Bernard Lee, like, underplaying every moment in his entire career as M. And like that just being where he's like, well, me and M were in Tokyo, boop, you know, and it's like, it's so fucking funny.
Dushka, tell me the truth. Am I as exciting as all those Western girls?
Oh, once when I was with Am in Tokyo, we had an interesting experience.
Thank you, Miss Moneypenny. That's all.
Bond, with the help of Bay, infiltrates the Russian consulate using an explosion to cover his tracks, and him and Tatiana escape through the sewers and onto the Orient Express. Unfortunately, Red Grant is also aboard the train. I love this idea because it is the least subtle I've ever seen a spy be in a movie, because not only does he like walk into the consulate and then blow it up, he proceeds to like constantly ask them about their clocks as though he's like nervously waiting for something. He's like, oh yeah, sure, the clocks are right, you know, and it's like, you're not even trying, man. like they don't think this is suspicious.
That's Bond, baby. You don't give a what.
They received forged documents while aboard the train, and James produces a nightgown for Tatiana, while Bay promises to keep a Russian agent who has come aboard occupied. I love this scene of them dragging this Russian agent into another car, and Karim Bey being like, okay, Here's my autobiography. Let's go. Chapter 1. Bond and Tanya have time for some afternoon delight, and Bond convinces her to get ready for dinner with a pat on the butt. Gross. Stop it.
Yeah.
On their way to the dining car, Bond is informed that Bay has been killed along with a Russian agent. Bond pays the conductor off to keep it quiet, thinking Tatiana's involved. Bond goes back to their cabin and roughs her up. She still claims to love him, and Bond leaves her alone. This scene is tough stuff. Like, I mean, he's not giving her a chance to respond, and he's literally just going for the smacking her around.
Yeah,
it's not great.
And
it's very Sean Connery's bad comments come to life.
Yes. Well, that's the thing, because it doesn't feel...
Somewhere Barbara Walters is shaking her head like in another train car.
It's one of those things where, like, I think people oftentimes will give things like this a pass because they're like, well, it was a different time. But this isn't even of this time. It's not like it was commendable or respectable to rough a woman up. Like, there's easier ways that he could have gotten this information from her. And it's weird that his first instinct is like, well, I'll punch you. Because he's even... I don't know. He's even has a lighter hand when it comes to some of his enemies. But when it comes to a woman, his first thought is like, well, I'm just going to beat the shit out of you. It's weird.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more than weird. It's bad.
It's there's this presumption of like high stress, like with a lot of these movies, it's like, well, he's got a lot on his plate, right? Like it feels like the tone is that, right? The tone's like, well, look, Bond's dealing with a lot. So, sometimes you got to slap a woman, right? Like that's especially these early movies have a lot of that. And it's not really even appropriate for like the time.
No.
Maybe like they're like a cultural like acceptance, where like, but not an actual thing you would do. You know what I mean? It's a weird, it's hard to parse because there's no defending it. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like it happens in all of these movies. And yeah, this one nastier than I remembered, I will say.
Yes.
I was definitely like, oh yeah, this is rough, right? Because you're kind of waiting for, I mean, you're about to get to it, but you're waiting for kind of the iconic scene on the train.
Right.
Yeah. But you got to get through this.
It's clear he has more respect for like his male enemies than he does a woman, because them, like, he's like almost fascinated in a way and respects like that they can take him out. Whereas her, it's like, nah, we're just going to immediately, bam, she's going to tell me what's up. It's like, worst thing that can happen to a woman. Let's do it. Boom.
Yeah.
Well, and he's like embarrassed. Like it's almost this thing of like, he's embarrassed he got fooled by her.
Yeah.
More than respecting her for fooling him. You know what I'm saying?
And it's because he doesn't respect her. He's so embarrassed.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah.
And listen, I get that he's mad that his friend is dead, but like a whole part of Bond's thing is that he's able to compartmentalize that shit. And this like clearly is not that. So you're right. I think it's the that he just doesn't see her as a person, which is really gross. Red tails James as he smokes on a train platform. Bond informs one of Bay's sons, who has met him there, that Bay has died and asks him to message M to send backup. Red, having overheard the whole exchange, intercepts the agent at the next stop, discreetly disposing of him so he can take his place. Bond invites Red, posing as Nash, back to his cabin, but Nash requests dinner, leaving ahead of Bond long enough for Bond to snoop in his suitcase. Nash orders red wine with fish, a faux pas. I instantly recognize this as wrong. I'm not even like a super upper class person, but I know white wine is for fish and chicken. Red wine is for red meat. It's like, come on.
Classic. Come on,
We know
Red.
how colors work.
Exactly. He also spills Tatiana's drink so he can refill it, but this time drugged. Back at the cabin, Tanya has passed out, and Bond reveals he's onto Red, stupidly letting his guard down, which I hate this bit because it's just like you very clearly know this is another spy, And he's just kind of like, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, which once again goes back to exactly what we were just talking about. Like, he sees Red more as a person than he does Tanya simply because of his sex. Red gets the upper hand and searches Bond. Bond pieces it all together, and Red delights in the fact that he's been one step ahead. Bond also realizes Tatiana has been a pawn in Spectre's game as well. I actually really like this moment, too, because like you mentioned about Dr. No, Dan, he really kind of works as a detective in that movie, and he does have a lot of roots in like the Dashiell Hammett style thing. In this movie, while smart, he is so much less the detective than he was in the last film, and Red truly has been one step ahead of him this entire time. And it's great because Bond is constantly referring that he knows he's in a trap, but he's doing nothing to get out of that trap. So when it springs, he barely gets out of it.
Yeah, it's like half luck and, brute force. And I think the villains being so compelling is, as you guys go through these movies, like, I feel like that's the X factor for so many of the best of these films, is like that of like Red Grant seems like he should probably win.
Yeah.
Right. Rosa Klebb seems like she's probably the smartest person in the movie. Right. So it's like you actually believe it, as opposed to Dr. No, where you're kind of like, what's going on? Okay. Yeah. Dr. No, robot hands. Okay, cool.
Red plans to make Bond and Tatiana's death look like a murder-suicide, but instead decides to torture Bond, which I don't really understand how he's like, I'm going to make it look like you killed her and then you killed yourself. But
he's
first I'm going to,
on it, bro.
Yeah, he's like, I'm going to, and he like requests Bond kiss his foot as fealty. Bond very sexily offers money instead, and from his rig suitcase, and Reg is tricked into setting off the case's gas canister, and a close hand-to-hand fight ensues. Two things I want to bring up. One, there is only one stunt person used in this scene at all. It's a very brief moment, but the rest is Connery and
Robert
Shaw going at each other. It's a tightly choreographed fight. Terrence Young actually helps choreograph it, but it's wild that neither of them got hurt, because it is so, like, they're literally fighting in a train cabin.
They're real men. They know how to fight.
Hell yeah.
The second thing I wanted to bring up is, in the novel, he actually doesn't get to his gadget in time, and he has to like figure out how to take out Red without getting him distracted with the gadget. And we talked about this in Dr. No. There's a moment in Dr. No where he escapes his cell because they stupidly put him in a cell with a vent. And in the novel, it's a trick. Like they are aware they put him in a cell with it. The same thing sort of happens here, where it's like Bond gets the upper hand out of sheer luck and other people's stupidity. Whereas in the novel, he sort of has to work for the getting out of the situation. I think I understand novels and movies are different things, and you kind of have to get characters to reach, get to the means to an end without having to fill in so much information. But it does create a Bond who is slightly dumber than his novel counterpart, honestly.
Yeah, and I think it persists, right?
Oh yeah,
like in the coming, you know what I mean? I think, speaking of kind of tropey things, you find that to be a set precedent for sure.
When I first started dating Dan Wahlberg, not to be confused with Dan Mecca, we had our moment. It passed too soon.
Ships in the night, my friend. Ships in the night.
Exactly. We were watching all the Bond movies together, and he just could not believe how often Bond willingly walked into a trap, like that it becomes like a trope of the series.
I do think it's the secret sauce for most detective / spy, if you want to go there, movies, of like they actually can't be that good at their jobs.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's talked about enough, if I'm being honest. Like, and my reference is always Chinatown. With Jack Nicholson. He's not actually a very good detective. And even if you read the Dashiell Hammett books, it's similar, right? It's like if you read Red Harvest, if you read the Sam Spade, Maltese Falcon, whatnot, like they're not dumb, but they miss things.
Yeah.
So there's a fallibility that's very relatable, which I think is important.
It's a variation on the Wolverine thing where, like, I'm very good at what I do, but what I do, I'm actually not very good at. That's the...
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important. Like,
as we say on the TV podcast, he is more beautiful than bold.
That's well said. No, I think you need that. So I think into the larger point of when you're reading a novel, you are figuring it out with your characters more than when you're watching a movie, you are watching characters figure it out.
That's also a very solid observation.
Do you know what I'm saying? So it's like, it would be boring if, like you said this already, but it would be boring if there was 4 extra minutes of him like, the gadget, okay, like, So I think it seems silly. It is silly, but it's why you like it.
Yes, absolutely. Red gets the upper hand on Bond and almost strangles him with his Garrett wire, but Bond is able to reach the hidden blade in his suitcase and takes Red out. Bond and a groggy Tatiana use Red's plan to escape the train and make their way to a stolen flower truck. Still not out of the woods, the truck is tailed by a helicopter, dropping grenades. I fucking love this. I love the literal I'm pulling a pin and dropping a grenade on you. Bond goes full north by northwest as he dodges it until he can retrieve his sniper rifle, killing the pilots using a bullet and their own grenade. He shoots the pilot, he shoots the man dropping the grenade from this helicopter, and that man has already pulled the pin on his grenade, so he just explode in the helicopter. I actually, it's funny because this is one of the later added action pieces. I think it's one of my favorites in all of Bond. I love watching him do the Cary Grant running from the crop duster in what clearly and is not a faked, it's not done with projection like a lot of the other stuff that they do in this movie, which we're about to get to. The boat chase is a lot of rear projection. It's very cool, very physical, and fun to watch as an audience member.
Well, and also so rarely do you see yourself on screen. How many times have I had to outrun a helicopter with grenades being thrown at me? So to see it reflected so perfectly, it's nice.
Representation matters.
That's what I'm saying. It's like, look, I'll be walking down the street, a helicopter will fly by, drop a grenade, and I have to try to kill the guy, and it's like to see it reflected beautifully. There's something really special about that.
It doesn't happen as much to you now that you've moved out of New York City, though.
That's
now that
true.
you live in Pittsburgh, it's like a little less.
It's so true, and it's it's well said. When you get to Western Pennsylvania, you have to hand in your grenades, and then when you become a father, and look, your priorities shift. It's true.
It is so true. I mean, much like real life, this just looks like a real movie in the ways that it delights me. This looks better than 80% of those Netflix movies.
You are so right about that. Yes.
You see the sweat. You see them struggling. It's not over choreographed in a way to where you already know exactly what's going to happen. It's just kind of hilarious and dumb luck that he happens to shoot the guy after the grenade pin is pulled. What a beautiful moment.
What a beautiful moment. I also love that, and I failed to mention this, Bond has taken a hostage in the truck to get him to where the truck was going to. And first of all, nobody dies in the truck either. Good on Bond for keeping everybody else safe. But he gets back in the truck. This guy brings them to a boat. They get in the boat. Bond immediately pushes this guy out of the boat.
No. He's like, can you swim?
Yes, yeah. He's like, I won't kill in cold blood.
Thoughtful. A gentleman.
I was going to say, this is the James Bond who tips the staff.
Exactly. An English gentleman.
And we cut back to Spectre Island, where Blofeld is meeting with Rosa Klebb. There's a really great tense scene where it's Kronstein and Rosa Klebb, and you think it's going to go one way. Rosa Klebb's really sweating, but Blofeld's basically looking for someone to blame, unhappy with this outcome. And instead of killing Rosa Klebb, a man walks in and uses the what did you call it? Boot knife?
Boot dagger.
Boot dagger.
Well, I called it a shoe knife. You called it a boot dagger.
Yes. To poison Kronstein and kill him. And I love the like drawl Blofeld, like 3 seconds. We really must find a poison that works faster, you know?
Yeah.
So good. Yeah.
We're back with Bond and a boat chase ensues, but Bond uses the extra fuel barrels in his there's like 4 fuel barrels on their motorboat, and he uses them to cover their escape. And we get some like really like wild shots of people on fire, and I was like, whoa, this is like way more violent than we've watched a lot of people die by bullets, but we're suddenly watching people burn to death, and it's a lot.
That didn't happen at your high school summer retreat.
Yeah, it's true.
A senior prank.
Yeah.
Making it to Italy, Bond and Tatiana are sharing a hotel room, but Kleb, disguised as a maid, attempts to steal the decoder for herself. Tatiana, still believing Kleb is Smersh, thinks it's her duty to help, but in the last second betrays Kleb. Kleb tries to get Bond with a poison boot knife, but Tatiana shoots her, and Bond quips that Kleb has had her kicks. Bond and Tatiana share a romantic gondola ride as Bond destroys the film of them making love. Matt Monro croons From Russia with Love as we get our very first James Bond will return, specifically telling us the next film is Goldfinger, and Bond and Tatiana banging a boat.
Banging on that gondola.
The end.
Fun fact, right after I got engaged in Venice, we went
Did you have sex in a gondola? Is that what you're about to tell us?
We went on a gondola ride.
Oh.
Isn't that nice?
That is nice. I was like, wow, this is about to get PG-13 rated.
Venice. Have you guys been to Venice?
No, never have.
It's pretty cool. Pretty cool place. The streets are water. I don't know if you guys know about that.
Hope you can swim.
Yeah, hope you.
The floating city.
Such an English gentleman, Chels. Such an English gentleman. Anybody have any final thoughts on this movie? I will say, just real quick, I love this one. This is absolutely one of my favorites. From Russia with Love has always been one of my favorite Bond movies. I, too, did not remember the roughing up of Tatiana being so brutal and shocking as it is at the time. I think everything else is kind of pitch perfectly fun, you know?
I think you guys are going to talk about all the movies. I think it's Connery's best performance as Bond.
I had so much fun. I was low-key cheering, rooting for, hoping for Rosa Klebb to win. Like, I feel like she's the bad bitch. She got a bad rap. Oh, if only that like voice dubbed little twit hadn't come back in the room, she would have won. But I get it. The boy always has to win, whatever. No, this was so much fun. It was so much better than what we've watched so far. It's like a real movie. I did not have to like make fun of any like rear projection. Come on. You could see where the money went and you're like, oh, mwah, love it. Wish more movies, even today, had like half the style, half the point of view, like just any of the characters that had any little twinkle or quirk or anything.
Yeah, and it's so funny because Terrence Young directs Thunderball, which I defend, but is kind of the example of like bloated Bond.
Yeah.
Which then becomes a state, like really does become a criticism for like many of the movies. And I just find it funny, that quote you referenced earlier, Gavin, like that's so true. Like you watch From Russia with Love and you're like, man, this is like spare, but it doesn't feel cheap.
No.
You know what I mean? It's like the money's on the screen, but it's not long. It makes sense. You do travel the globe. There's charming side characters. It is funny. You know, and if you take away the assault and the misogynism, we're in a good place.
Just a couple little tweaks.
Surprisingly less racist than Dr. No.
Fairly so.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, good on that. We did, when we started this podcast, we said we would be devoted to talking about, queer-coded villains and the women characters. I want to start with Tatiana. Tatiana is such an interesting case because she is somebody who's double-crossing Bond, for all intents and purposes, she goes there with the idea that she's not really going to be in love with him, and almost instantly falls head over heels for him. And I think it's this interesting dichotomy with her where she's supposed to be kind of this like real innocent sweetheart. Like she basically, Rosa Klebb tells her, you have to fuck him or else I'll kill you. And because she's at first kind of like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to have sex with a man I don't know. But I think there's this fascinating thing where, you know, I don't know, like I said, it's such a weird thing for her to be like a woman who's willing to show up naked in his bed and then be kind of coy about it. It's this kind of give and take when it comes to her.
And like back to like the whole interview moment, like she says like she's slept with 3 people, and it's like whenever she's like interrogated about it, it's basically she loved those people.
Yes.
So it's like, oh, this is why she's sleeping with him. She's like, I could get around with this.
Yeah, she can only get off if she's in love.
Oh, yeah.
She's a romantic.
Everyone has their kink.
Everyone has their kink, and her kink is romance. Correct. Dan, how do you feel about Tatiana?
Well, like I said, I mean, yeah, everything you guys are saying, it's a more of a complex performance than you would expect at first blush, and I think that's credit to the movie making credit to the performance by Danielle Bianchi. Unfortunately, the movie kind of disposes of her once you're at the train.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate. But it's also par for the course, unfortunately, with a lot of movies during this time, and Bond movies in particular. Though the next movie, it changes slightly. You know, credit where credit's due. Goldfinger, you get kind of an upgrade in Bond girl essentialism in terms of to the narrative. But yeah, I mean, it's I love the trope of I'm tasked with falling in love to pretend to fall in love, and then I really fall in love. You know what I mean? It's like,
yes,
it's so silly, but it is like, it does warm my heart.
And because the movie is so economical in comparison to some of the later films, it does sort of have to happen as quickly as it does. It is sort of like has to be a love at first sight, because there just isn't time to watch her fall in love. And listen, I think it's much more acceptable here than it is even in later films. Like one of my biggest pet peeves was in the film Spectre, when you're introduced to the Bond girl in that, and there's a scene where Bond is going to be tortured to death, and she walks over to him and she's like, I love you. And it's like, wait, what? You spent a night in a train together? But it's just funny to be like, well, this is 1963. It's fine. You know, it's a much more innocent time.
Yeah, it's true. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, but once again, bringing it back to the macro view of everything, these movies reflect the times in a very fascinating way, like few other cinematic documents do, right? Where it's like you have 1962 to now. It's incredible. It's like you can watch the world change, you know, through the Bond films, you know?
And it's like much more believable in like when you're watching films from the 50s and 60s that people fall in love together, like just so much faster. Like that's every movie.
Right.
Like in the first 30, 40 years of filmmaking, it's so fast. And I think it's just because of the style of filming lends itself to the romantic aspects of it, just like the lighting, the framing, all of it. Whereas now it's very much like, we know, like, doesn't Sam Mendes direct Spectre?
Yeah.
Is that one of his?
Yep.
Yeah, we know what he's going to do. He's not a romantic filmmaker. Like,
no.
So whenever, like, if now I Love You comes along, it's like, okay, sure, whatever.
Yeah. I truly expected Bond in that moment when she told him, like, I love you, to be like, I like you a lot too. So like,
cool.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Let's talk about our barely queer-coded villains, Rosa Klebb and Red Grant. I mean, these two are gay as fuck. they are in a queer platonic friendship. Absolutely. I love, like, first of all, once again, it's wild that the stuff that they get away with Rosa was allowed for them to get away with, because she's like, in that meeting with Tatiana, she's like feeling her up, she's checking her out, she's like lifting her skirt a bit and whatnot. And once again, it pales in comparison to what Rosa Klebb does in the book, but it's still like, for 1963, it's kind of shocking. And like we talked about in the rundown of the film, it's very clear that Red Grant just wants Bond. He, it's the obsession is more than just, I want to kill you. And that's, I mean, Bond can't help it either. He gets in that train car and he's like, boy, you are fit.
Been long in Yugoslavia?
About 3 years.
Interesting work?
Yes, sometimes. You know how it is, old man.
You look very fit, Nash.
Yes, I try to keep in shape. So what's our problem, sir?
Yeah, he wants him to be like a friendly spy.
Yeah.
Like, to your point,
Yeah.
like he allows himself the mistake in a very kind of I mean, look, for the time, and I'm speaking for the time.
For more stay in the time?
There's a clear, and this is look, I think this is why you get, unfortunately, decades of these stereotypes of gay villains and whatnot, is like the way you got away with that type of representation was making them the bad guys. Right. That, it's not right, but it's there. And I think there's this perversity in the text of Red Grant on film in 1963 that's so fascinating, right? Because it's like, watching it now, we're all like, oh man, he was gay. He wanted to have sex with James Bond.
Yeah.
And we're saying it like as an observation. And in 1963, it was like, this sick fuck. Like, it's like,
right.
Well, I can't believe he's killing people and he's a little weird. It's like,
right, exactly.
And I think it's fascinating. Yeah.
I mean, as I mentioned before, he's introduced in the film by a buxom blonde is massaging him, and he
cannot be bothered. Yeah,
little to no reaction at all to the. Whereas, like, if that were James Bond, he'd be, like a little lower,
eyes all over her.
Yeah,
well, and even
absolutely.
in the book, I would even wager the book has less of that about Grant. But what's crazy in the book is like Red Grant was a serial killer in another part of England for like a year. And like that cool rep, it's part of why he gets the job in Russia, right? So it's like there's this whole crazy origin story of the Red Grant character that I was like, I would watch the Red Grant go, being Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type, like going around killing people. But like Fleming, he puts all that perversity on violence, right? He's just kind of like, the dude just likes taking lives. What can I say? When it's a full moon, he kills. That's like the whole thing.
Yeah, he's much more interested in killing than he is in sex. I do, to that point, by the way, for the novel, I do like that he like kind of wanders into the Smersh office and is
He's like, hey, can I kill people or what's up?
Yeah, and they're like,
do you like killing people?
Great.
Yeah.
He's
I love killing people. Can I kill people for you? I guess, can you go kill this person? He's like, I'm going to go do it right now. I'll be right back.
I'll be back.
And he crushes that assignment and they give him the job. They're like, hey, good job killing that guy.
It's so funny too, because like I mentioned before, Lottie Lenya has a very striking face, but she's not hideous by any means. And I just think it's so funny that she's described in such a way in the book. But as you mentioned, Fleming was more impressed by her career than he is by her as an attractive person. And I think they do a really great job. And obviously, like, he does describe that Grant is rather good looking in the books, but the way that they make Grant in the movie, like, he is he's a pristine Aryan.
Oh yeah, he's like an Aryan ideal. Yeah,
yeah, and it's like a fascinating thing to like make Robert Shaw this kind of, because I would say that once again, everybody has a much more normal body than what we consider bodybuilder chic nowadays, but he's even more fit than Connery.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
I don't know. I really love them both. They're two of my favorite villains as well too. And I like, there's a version of this movie, like I said before, where you take things out, but I think if you do take things out, you run the risk of cutting Red down, and he's so interesting to watch throughout the way that he watches and perceives and understands Bond, whether it be a crush or as a target. And then gadgets, we don't really have a ton of gadgets here. I do love whenever Q Branch gives Connery a toy or any Bond a toy that just explodes.
The suitcase is so fun.
Yeah. It always seems like a bad, not the best sort of deterrent. And when it works, it works. You know, later, Chels, you'll see the worst car feature in one of the films where Q is just like, and then it explodes if you do this thing, and it does. But yeah, I love the idea that like he has the knives in there. I like that the money is in there, and I like the movie kind of makes you forget about the money as though it's not important, and then that ends up being what truly saves his life in the film. And I don't know, the sniper rifle, it's not, I mean, it literally, it's not hidden. It's like, it's literally a sniper rifle.
You guys are going to have to track when gadgets are introduced and not used, like how often that happens.
Yeah.
Because it can't happen a lot.
I'm also waiting for gadgets to go awry and just backfire on him.
Right, which
Like,
definitely
things
happens.
worked out this time,
Right.
but now I want to see things backfire.
Because as we're talking about, I'm trying to literally just colloquially think of like when is it like something introduced and then not brought up again? It must have happened. You're gonna, as you go through, you'll have to just keep an eye out.
There's definitely some. I mean, I think that car one I just mentioned is so wild, which is even weirder because the gadget actually works. It's just the dumbest gadget ever. But yeah, once again, as the movies go on, we're going to get more and more interesting gadgets, but I do like talking about them. And I just think it's funny that they do a really good job at making you forget the money thing. Cause the whole time I keep being like, oh yeah, there's knives in the thing. Like that's going to be, and admittedly that's how he kills Red Grant. But like, it's truly him using the money that gets Grant to even go for the case and for the case to blow up in his face.
You should also mention, I'm sure it'll come up, Desmond Llewellyn basically took scale as payment his whole career playing Q.
Yeah. Everybody loved him. And when he died, I remember being like really upset about it too.
One of the great final scenes of a character.
Truly. I know most people do not get a send off like that. It's
incredible.
It's kind of wild.
It's incredible.
But that's all in your future, Chels.
That's in the future.
No spoilies. No spoilies.
Now that you've seen 2 full Eon Bond movies, how are you feeling? I like to check in on you to make sure you're doing okay.
Oh my goodness. I need more of them to be closer to this than Dr. No, because Dr. No, I had so many notes, a lot of changes.
More like Dr. Notes.
Yeah.
Oh, ayo.
You know, so happy, like the lack of like yellow face, brown face, like obviously.
Yeah, Dr. No. Oh my God, yeah.
It was rough. I mean, the voice dubbing in this is so much better. Like the dialogue actually aligns with her mouth moving. That really helps. But it's so nice. It's like a real movie, and we don't get enough of those anymore. I get so sad going to the movie theater most days.
Yeah, it's too big of a topic to even get into. It's just
I know.
I'm fascinated by the automation of that stuff because, Gavin, you edit, I produce, like everybody works really hard. I always like struggle with that part of that criticism of like, I know, we know how hard everybody works at all this stuff.
Yeah.
That being said, and this isn't really the fault of these crew people or whatever, there are just mechanisms in place now that just allow for you to work harder at other stuff that's less important, right? So then all of a sudden it's like you are just yada-ing the stuff that's interesting and like automating that where like, you know what I mean? And it's just a funny, it's a shame. I mean, that's just what it is. It's a shame.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know what I mean? It's like, there's no other word for it. I mean, so when you see a movie nowadays, as we record in 2024, that feels original, even in its like rendering, you're just like, oh my God, can I have more of this?
Yeah, it's almost like the lack of corporate structure around some of this, even though these movies were so heavily under studio things, even like 40s, 50s, 60s, like so heavily under it. It just feels like something special is happening then, but now everything is so corporate and they want it to like work within different algorithms that are just like, we're just going to put this to where you can watch it on TikTok. And it's like, no, we want to be able to watch things that are interesting. And there are people who want to make that. So I wish people had the resources of almost like back then to make something fun.
Well, and look, the gift and the curse of the Broccoli family having control is, I think, how you get some of that maintaining of engagement, right? As you know, if the Broccolis sell it to some company that then gets bought by Cablevision or whatever, you know, then everything changes very quickly, you know. But they didn't.
Very curious because a lot of this is MGM stuff, and MGM is Amazon now, so that's like looking way into the future.
Yeah, but the Broccolis still.
I was gonna say, as we mentioned in the last episode, you know, they created a second shell company that holds all the rights to the books, and they are not letting that go at any point.
No, I wouldn't.
Yeah, I think those are all really fascinating points, and it's true. Like, obviously, like, it's, you know, people don't do Technicolor nowadays, like this movie, and people don't shoot on film anymore, so the lighting is very different. But yeah, it's a gorgeous movie to look at, and I think, you know, the concepts that they came up with in the editing room to keep it lean, which once again you're heading towards the non-lean era, Chels. But I think it's really brilliant. And I know I talked about editing a lot because I am an editor, but I think it's all that stuff's really fascinating.
Yeah, it's important with these movies, you know, more than most. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very important. Action movies, especially. Like, come on. Any action movie under 2 hours, I am going to be seated, and it's going to be at least like a 2.5-star movie just for that reason.
Seriously.
Yeah, great on a curve. I don't blame you. Dan, before we let you back out into the field, release you for your next mission, why don't you let people know where they can find you online and what you're up to?
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, thank you. This has been fun. Yes, I write for the film stage. I co-host a podcast called The B-Side for the Film Stage with our mutual buddy Connor O'Donnell. We talk about movie stars and movie directors, not the movies that made them famous or kept them famous, but the ones they made in between. And we are coming out of as we're recording, as you're listening, we're well out of our hiatus, and we're talking about I think, Gavin, you were just on our podcast talking about Halloween themed stuff. And if you go to the film stage, I have interviews with people like Lee Daniels and James Ivory. I got to interview about his new documentary. Yeah. And I host a story podcast called Fathom, which you should listen to wherever you listen to your podcast. Gavin's written Fathom stories. I've written a few, a bunch of people have. It's like Twilight Zone inspired. And so that's a fun thing I do on the side. So thank you. Yeah.
First of all, thank you for being our first guest. I really love having you on. I love talking to you about movies. I truly do. Even when we disagree, I always come away from conversations with you feeling like I've like learned something or you know, received really good information and whatnot. So I like the way your brain works a lot. Second, just on the Fathom thing, thank you so much for having produced some of the Fathom stuff I've written. Also, I have some ideas for some other ones that maybe I'll get around to writing.
Please do.
I have 2 ideas. So
we're gonna do a new, as we're recording kind of end of summer here. We're gonna do a new one with our buddy Evan. That's like a black box airplane story, which I love that idea. And so we're prepping that as we are talking, so that if you are listening, it should be. I hope it better be available.
Hopefully, it'll be out.
It better be available because we got it done. But yeah, I love it. I love doing it. It allows you to be creative and kind of have fun and Shells, if you want to do a voice, write something, you let me know. Now that we're good friends,
Gavin, we'll have to talk about this.
I would love that.
It's an open forum. You know what I mean? It's a creative space.
Beautiful.
Well, that's case closed on From Russia with Love. Thank you for listening to the Q Division. If you'd like to listen to our previous episodes, we're available wherever you listen to podcasts. Please make sure to rate and review our show while you're there. It really helps us out. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at QDivisionPod on both, or you can email us at qdivisionpod@gmail.com. Until next time, agents, we hope that we left you shaken and not stirred.
From Russia with love, I fly to you, much wiser since my